Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. Last time we weren't sure whether we were going to do this or a different book, but we are back today to talk about an emotional nonfiction book. We are here to check off our reading challenge for reading a nonfiction book from or about a modern country facing conflict. We chose to read One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar Akkad, which neither of us has a physical copy of, so I've put a lovely little photo down here for you to see. But we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to let Gretchen give you a summary of it. We're going to do our overall opinions, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the book in general. Overall, our reviews are generally going to be spoiler-free. I'm not sure that you can spoil a nonfiction book to begin with, because it's not like there's going to be a plot twist that you're going to be surprised about, but there's nothing for you to be scared of in this video. So please, if you haven't read it, you should be able to listen to the entire thing. Otherwise, if you have read it, talk to us down below about this. Give us some recommendations for other stuff, so on and so forth. But to start it all off, like always, a summary from Gretchen if you haven't read this one.
This book is really hard to summarize because it's definitely, and we'll talk about this a little bit, it's definitely very different than what we expected. So I just have the kind of the genesis for this was a tweet from the author. So on October 25th, just 3 weeks after the bombardment of Gaza, Omar Akkad put out a tweet. One day when it's safe, when there's no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to hold anyone accountable, everyone will have always been against this. This tweet was viewed over 10 million times. And I wanted to bring that up because this is a lyrical book. It is a book that talks about Omar's history as a journalist, the places he's gone. He was originally in Egypt. He lived in Qatar, and he was in Canada. Now he's in the US. So he is a very well-traveled person with a myriad of different viewpoints on things, which I think comes through really in this book. There's definitely a memoir aspect to it, but it's also about the genocide in Gaza, but also the viewpoint on the conflict more than the conflict itself, and talking about how, what it means that one day everyone will have always been against this, despite the incredibly fractious conversations happening about I don't even want to say just what's happening in Gaza, because there's also the US response, the Western response, what it means to, be an activist, a performative activist. There's all this stuff wrapped up in this book. And for such a short book, it's covering a lot. It's a book to sit with and to think with. I just want to read the end of this real quick, because again, I think that this is going to do a much better job than I can do trying to encapsulate this. This book is his heartsick breakup letter with the West. It is a breakup letter we are watching all over the US, on college campuses, on city streets, and the consequences of this rupture will be felt by all of us. His book is for all the people who want something better than what the West has served up. This is the book for our time. And that's again from the blurb of it. Because yeah, this is a really hard book to summarize because there's so much going on, but we will do our best to discuss it vis-a-vis a book review. This is not, I don't think we're going to do a philosophical, deep dive into it. I think this is a book that you need to read 3, 4, 5, 10 times. But we'll do our best to give you our review.
Yeah. When it comes to the overall reviews, like the very first thing when I finished this one was that I felt like I could not give it a star rating, because that felt too small and kind of demeaning to the book itself. Putting this at 5 stars, even though that is like, I'm probably going to do that, because not putting a star rating makes it seem like it's a 0 star, which it is not a 0 star. Like that feels like it's like too far to the bottom. But then again, putting it at a 5-star rating next to like a 5-star romance feels like these two things are not comparable. Like these things don't feel like they should be sitting next to each other. Not that you can't read both of those things. Obviously, Gretchen is a person who does this quite often, reading very hard hitting political stuff next to romance stuff. But it just doesn't feel like these things should be on like in conversation with each other in the way that it would be. But I am definitely one of those people who thinks that you should read this. I'm going to go into it a little bit more when we get later into this video about who I think will actually pick up this book, and whether I think it would be successful at what it is trying to do. But that doesn't negate the fact that I think that it is a very powerful read. I do think that it is a book that I am more likely going to get a physical copy of eventually, when I get back out into a bookstore again, because while I did buy the audiobook that I listened to from Libro FM, and I will probably listen to it again, I do think that I will want to highlight it the next time that I read it, and I need a physical copy to do that. So I don't have that at the moment. I will probably get one, and that's saying something, because now I'm going to be buying 2 copies of it. It wasn't just a library book, right? I've already bought a copy of it, and I'm getting another one. So I think that says enough. It's definitely one that's emotional, that's worth the read. I think more people should pick it up than probably will pick it up. So if you're on the fence about it, just grab a copy. I'm full endorsement. Anybody who's interested in it should grab a copy.
I agree with everything that Michaela just said. I always feel weird giving like different types of books the same rating scale, right? Because for me, like I don't rate romance books in the same way that I rate nonfiction books anyway. So like that's something that I already have just kind of like decided is just something I deal with.
Yeah.
And so when I think about a nonfiction book, I think about like how many people I think should read this, right? Um, if it is would be a good read for them. And then I do think about some technical aspects because there are conventions just within in nonfiction that are similar. You know, it has its own genre conventions as well. And like, is it using, you know, them well? Is it technically well written? We'll talk a little bit more about like they're not like bad things, but like some of the things that have might trip you up if you go into this book, because again, it is a very mixed genre book of like you know if you think that you're going in for like a discussion, like a historical discussion of Israel and Palestine, that's not what's going to happen. You need to go read a history book. That's not this book. But if you want something powerful, personal, extremely lyrically written, like I said, I was telling Michaela too, I was like, I too listened to it on audiobook and I wished that this is a book for all y'all highlighters and annotators because it's just, that's why I wanted to read some of the blurb too, even if it wasn't necessarily written by the author, because there's so much power in these sentences. And again, I think it's an important book for us all to reflect upon our stance in this situation, and a book where you may need to be prepared to be uncomfortable, and to be okay with that and to keep going, because he's, like I said, directly talking about the Western response perspective, and that means us. And so, yeah, but I think, like I said, it's one of those books to sit with, to think with, to annotate, to read again. And yeah, to really, and I do honestly think like it was also someone who I was like, thank you. Someone is explaining why right now, at one point, I think he even says, you can feel like you're losing your mind. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for someone saying it. And we'll get into this, but sometimes it really does feel like, if you have any type of empathy about the situation, that in some areas, like people are making you feel like you're losing your mind. And so yeah, that's a little bit all over the place, but I also disagree. I gave it 5 stars. And yeah, it's like 200 pages. It's a quick read. It's a good read. It's a read that you can read multiple times in one day. Like, just go for it.
Yeah. We're going to start off by talking about who this book is for, because that's probably the biggest question that I had when I finished it was like, who was going to pick up this book and like what would it be successful at what it's trying to do based on that. Gretchen made a good point that the title of this one is a little bit antagonistic, out the get-go. So if you are not a person who's already leaning this direction, you're probably not going to pick up this book and get your viewpoints completely changed. I said that it probably would be best to hand to somebody who is a liberal but not necessarily a leftist, someone who is already leaning left but isn't maybe fully convinced about why all of these young kids are doing protests on campuses. Someone who's like, but the news is telling me that Hamas is a bad guy and we need to like let Israel defend itself. And it's like, okay, you clearly haven't spent any amount of time looking further at this issue than what has just been presented to you, like pretty surface levelly. So that is the person who I would definitely say needs to read this book. Like this is a person who I would say read this. It will help you understand why everybody is sort of at odds. I don't think that you can hand this to like a Republican and have them believe anything. Like they're fully just not going to be with it. So is it going to convince everyone? No, obviously not. It's leaning left, if not already pretty far to the left. When I was reading it, it was reminding me a lot of a book that I read several years ago for the book prize called Conditional Citizens by Layla Lakami, which follows a very similar like memoir style, talking about the ways in which different groups, especially in America, are viewed, and how those views can change pretty quickly just based on the news cycle. So the way that we are viewing people from the Middle East currently, that one also is obviously focusing on that, but it looked at like the way we view Japanese people during World War II, anything like that, the ways that the politics of the world affects the way that certain citizens gain or lose sort of social status points in the US around that. This one also focuses on that. I also was thinking very heavily about something like hood feminism, which felt very much to me as someone who spends a lot of time ingesting leftist media and looking at and thinking about things critically. To me, that wasn't giving me anything new or anything shocking, but I know a lot of people read it and were profoundly changed about the way that they were thinking about the world. I think this is one of those books as well. If you are a person who is already very deep in support of Palestine, who already like very much understands stuff, it's maybe not going to give you any new information, especially because it is not trying to do like a history of it, but it is going to be definitely very impactful and maybe validating, like Gretchen said, about your feelings of feeling like you're crazy, about how people who you would view on the same side as you, like liberals, can be feeling like they're being an enemy right now because they're not on the same side when it comes to this particular issue. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but that's sort of how I would view this about who this is for. Definitely more left-leaning folks than right-leaning folks. I don't think that that's a question. I don't think that that's surprising to anybody.
And I would just say too, just to tag on to that too, you know, this is extremely critical of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And you know, basically his point is like the Republicans, and I believe he uses this phrase. He's like, the Republicans are monstrous about this, but at least they have stuck to their guns on that and they have stood for that.
Yeah.
And we can disagree with it, but they have stood their ground on that, where opposed to as many people in the Democratic Party have given platitudes and then not like, you know, done anything to really back that up. So again, going to like, you know, that conversation of like, definitely can't give it to a Republican. But it also reminded me of, if you're interested in a history book, there's a book, the guy's first name is Ed and I'm forgetting the last name, but the subtitle was How the Democrats Lost Their Soul in the Center. And you know, it's so hard, I think, in media right now, because I went looking when I was doing my whole like, I was doing all these books on the history of the Republican Party, the history of the Democratic Party. I read books by Republican theorists, Democratic theorists, and I was like, okay, where's my critique of the Democratic Party? Because I have 17 of these on the Republican Party right now, but like, I'm not a fan of what's happening over here either. And that's like the only book that I was able to find. So if there are new ones that have come out since then, that'd be great. But this is also this one, which is very much, again, parsing apart the very, very differential people in the Democratic Party as well, instead of talking about that as like a monolith in opposition to, which I think is really important. So, how do you read this book, right? Michaela and I have already alluded to probably how you know I'm going to answer this. But we both listened to it on audiobook. And for the record, the audiobook is great. It is
Yes.
narrated by the author. And so you are able to hear him give, not that it's like, he's a really good audiobook narrator, which is not the case for some authors who read their own books. Some of them really should not have done that. But he is a good narrator, and you hear it, even though he's really good at keeping to a narrator style, right, rather than like a conversational style, which is not how audiobooks are meant to be. Um, but you can hear the emotion in his voice at certain parts. Like, this is a book that he's written, that he spent the time editing. Like, I mean, he spent years with this book and these words, and reading some of these sections where he is describing atrocities. And yeah, I mean, you can just hear it in his voice that he's just so emotionally invested in this. So this isn't something where he is saying like, I'm so sad. Like, he's sad. He's distraught. He is ripped up, and able to acknowledge his own um I forget, I don't know what the word I want, but like, he has a point where he talks about how like his daughter was in the hospital and almost had something terrible happen to her, and that frightened him more than anything in the world. And he was like, how can I be so frightened about a thing that almost happened when there are these actual atrocities going on? And so very, very personal, very emotional. um However, the way that this book is written, there are chapters, but within the chapters, it's going kind of back and forth between a more, I would say, informational section, perhaps, on maybe an atrocity going on, or a Western government response, or something, and then back and forth between more of a memoir section. Um, and then there are sometimes at the end or in the middle of these sections, I'm not sure because I've listened to the audiobook, like these small little vignettes. And it's really just like a paragraph of a scene or something meant to kind of add emphasis to his point. Um, and because of that, not that we necessarily think about this, but books are often like a very visual medium, even if they're not graphic novels. And in this case, I think the seeing the visual space between these sections, which I imagine appears in the print copy, I think is really important to be able to stop there, take the breath, and realize that we're transitioning into something else, because it doesn't happen in the audiobook, which can make it seem kind of disjointed because you're like, oh, I was here and this was like really heavy, and now I'm here and this is also heavy, but for a different reason. It's just like it doesn't kind of give you that space. And then, as we also talked about, the ability to sit, to think, to pause, to underline. Um, like I said, this is a 200-page book that you need to take some time with, that I just don't think is afforded through the audiobook. So certainly could do something that you pair like the audiobook and the physical copy, but we both came down on the side of this is a physical copy read for the best and most meaningful reading experience. Like, I told Michaela, I was like, we were going to do a really good, like, deep dive philosophical, like, I would need to listen to this book like at least 4 times. Like, I would need space and time. So yeah, definitely if you're thinking about it and you want to sit with it, pick up a physical copy.
I will also add to that, as someone who habitually reads my audiobooks at 3 times speed, that I purposefully slowed myself down for this one. Um, I brought it down to 2 times speed because, like Gretchen said, he does read it the way that like an audiobook narrator would read it, which for me, listening to someone speak that way makes my brain angry and I have to speed it up a little bit. But I could slow it down to a point where I was giving myself more space, because I don't think you can listen to this at 3 times speed. You have to have some amount of space um in order to fully like take in what's going on, because it's so short. He's throwing a lot at you very quickly, and if you had it sped up to the point that I normally read audiobooks at, I don't think that you can internalize everything that's going on. So just also adding that in there, if you're a person like me who habitually reads their audiobooks quite sped up. I would recommend slowing it down if you are choosing to go that route, because for some people they are just going to pick the audio, which is totally fine. And again, valid choice, just letting you know that you might want to slow down your speed for this one. Both of us did the thing we do sometimes when we read this one and finished it. We read some of the other reviews that people have put forward on Goodreads and Storygraph to sort of get an understanding of how other people are receiving this. I in particular was doing this because, again, like I said, I wasn't sure like how it was going to be received and if it would be successful to someone who isn't as far left as both Gretchen and I are. Like, I kind of wanted to see what those people were thinking of it in order to get a grasp of how they understood it. One of those reviews was saying how they felt like it was cheapening this book by using Gaza as a way to like publicize or promote a memoir. Like, they were viewing this as just Omar's memoir and like it wasn't doing anything else, which I think is the wrong way to take away what this book was doing. But it is definitely very heavily memoir based, and I think the point of that was to remind people that this is a book about people. This is a tragedy and there are people who are experiencing it, and part of the ways that you do that is reminding you that the person writing the book is a person and giving bits of himself in order to do that. So yes, it is a memoir. Like, it is definitely like very focused on some things that you may not necessarily think have anything to do with what's going on in Gaza, like talking about him moving to Canada for the first time and what it was like growing up in as someone from the Middle East in the West. Like, that sort of stuff doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one connection that you might think, but it is all building to this point of everyone is a person and a lot of what's going on is dehumanizing. And that's what needs to be brought back into the forefront when you're talking about tragedies like this, is to rehumanize what's going on. There are actual people with actual lives who are being affected by this every single day, and they don't get a redo on their life. Like, they don't get to live a better life because they spent their childhood starving to death because politics was going on, I guess, would be sort of the basis of how you would view this. So I think that, yes, the critique of it's very heavily memoir based is there. If you went into this looking for a history book, or just a fully just political view of what's going on in between Israel and Gaza, then this isn't what you're going to get out of this one. That's not what this book is trying to do. So maybe just be aware of that, I guess. We've said it before in this review. It's not a history book. If that's what you're looking for, you're going to have to go somewhere else.
And also, too, I think the memoir is because this book is about how people are telling this story to themselves.
Yeah.
And also, as a journalist, he's very critical of media and the words that they use to like describe. And so he's like going back to like, this when he was growing up in the Middle East and there was a Gulf War, and the ways that even like Egyptian, media was talking about. And so like, the words that we use to dehumanize people, like in the language that we use to skirt around the fact that people are dying, and how that allows people, particularly in the West, to take that step back and to allow it to be dehumanized as well. And so he's not only giving you his personal experience and also why he is a person to tell this story, right?
Yeah.
Because if he was completely removed, he'd be like, who are you to say any of this? Right. And he's giving you not just his personal investment as a journalist, as a person, as someone who grew up in the Middle East, but like these connections in his life that help him make meaning and providing them to us to help us also make meaning, and to understand the point. So yeah, I mean, there were definitely sections that I agree. I was like, why are we here right now? But then you kind of have to trust that the book is going to go into it, and there's a connection to be made. So in terms of connections, I had one that I was waiting to happen that never did. And I don't mean this in a way of like, this is like negative critique of the book. I just think that it's an interesting corollary story that certainly could have, in some cases, bolstered his argument, particularly because he has this memoir element, right? If it was more of like a history of, the events, boom, boom, like something like that. Okay, maybe not, obviously, but it goes back and forth in time a lot, like all the way back to his childhood. Um, and he does not bring up COVID. And I thought that that is such a important topic to potentially even make a Western audience make sense of this, because if you are a person who is already struggling with how people don't seem to care, right? And that's his point, is like there are people who feel like they're losing their minds because there is this terrible tragedy going on and you're feeling so much empathy and like horror and terror when other people are just like, oh yeah, people are starving. It's like, what? Um, which is a lot of what we saw happening with COVID. And there was a very, very viral headline, if you will, that was, I don't know how to make you care about other people. And this is the Western hyper individualism that was like, well, I don't need to get vaccinated. I don't need to wear a mask because that's my choice. When, like, for me, I was like, I couldn't stand to hurt someone else. And so if there is even a 1% chance that this, means someone else doesn't get sick, like I'm going to go into that because it's like a community effort. There's been a lot of better people talking about this, books about like communal versus individual and the response to that in COVID. I've read some of them. Um, it's not to get into it, but simply to say that that might have been a really good corollary argument about, like, if his higher level purpose is to explain how we dehumanize people and things that do not affect us, which is like his higher order, or one of his higher order themes, right? There's something to be said there. There was also, there was recently also a headline that was like the toxic empathy that is pulling Christians to the left. And the comment that I saw about this on whatever social media site it was on, it's like, say you're a psychopath without saying you're a psychopath. Because, like, what toxic empathy? Wait, talk about some wild work. And obviously, this did not come out when the book came out, but I think that there is a larger conversation to be had here. And like I said, I think that the book is short. It's like very focused. It's trying to keep its like viewfinder on one thing and one place. And I completely understand that this isn't a negative criticism. But I think if to extend his argument, if you will, there's so much to talk about there, because I was feeling the corollary really strong as I was reading, even though he never said anything about it. So yeah, we we need to talk about empathy, guys.
Yeah, the loss
as a nation.
Yeah, the loss of social responsibility and living in community is being felt very strongly right now in general here. So the way that we're sort of going to wrap up this review, or like bring it all together, is to talk about whether or not we felt like this book technically counts for the challenge that we picked it for. And we're going to count it, but we definitely understand that it is still walking a line. We had discussed before doing this review possibly picking up some other books and discussing them together, but having read this one, we felt like we couldn't like do that. We wouldn't have given enough space to a book that we think is important for other people to read. So we weren't going to like muddy that by talking about other things. This review is definitely already going to be long enough on its own that it doesn't need more stuff added to it. So while it may not fully complete the prompt, because it is still very much talking about the West's view of a conflict somewhere else versus sticking solely to a conflict in another country, it certainly still fulfills the prompt of being the heart of it and the core of it being about a conflict in another country. So we are still going to count it here. I feel like, because like we just said, there is this empathy drought that we're sort of feeling here in the West. Books like this are important at a time like this. to remind people that there are definitely still people who are feeling it. Like it's validating to have uh hear from other people that yes, you're not the only person who's sitting here listening to a bunch of people who just don't seem to care. There are people who care. There's people who care all around, and it may be the negativity bias. I think towards the end of this, he said something along the lines of how there's like 10% bad people, 10% good people, and 80% people who can go either way. And I feel like that does and he agrees too that that does a disservice. Like I don't think there necessarily is like this tiny 10% of good people. Much more people are good and lean towards good, and a book like this might help more people move closer to the side that we feel like would be more helpful and more compassionate and full of more empathy towards other people, whether it's people in our own country or people outside of it. And again, the title is making reference to the fact that our grandparents grew up in a world where racism, like very blatant outward racism and acts of violence towards people of color, was normalized. Um, and we live in a world where we heard about stuff like that and don't understand how that could have happened. Maybe in our current political climate, at this very moment right now, we understand it a little bit better. But 10 years ago, even, that feeling like it didn't make sense how something like World War II happened, how something like everything that led up to the civil rights movement, we felt like we were moving in the right direction. And maybe right now, at the current time, we don't feel like that's the true. We feel like we're slipping back a little bit, but books like this definitely are meant to help reorient you into the direction that we feel like we are going, and to help you feel like you can go out and do something more so than just reading this book on its own. It gives you the feeling like, no, social movements do have power and you can do something about it. There, and you should actually do something about it as well.
And I feel like another aspect that maybe I'll just touch on really briefly is being able to empathize with people who are choosing to walk away. Because it talks a lot about, like, people who are giving up on the Democratic Party, but like people who, it's you're recognizing that a system that you thought stood for like truth, justice, and the American way, with the new Superman movie coming out and everything, and like is not living up to its ideals. And there are a certain set of people who are going to get that delusionment and they are going to walk away. Or, the United States abdicating a rule which it was always pretending to be in the world, and now is kind of there's more people like speaking back against that, and we can see that in our global politics now. So even if it, you if that's a feeling that you don't understand, this is another way to again empathize with, because again, we can empathize without agreeing, right? So not that you have to agree with that choice, but that you can understand maybe more where those types of viewpoints are coming from historically, personally, so that we can have better conversations. Because that's why I read nonfiction from other points of view. I have some books by some conservative thinkers that I knew I was never going to agree with, but I was like, okay, like without the rhetoric, explain it to me. So that maybe it's not going to change my mind, but I can better have a conversation about it. And so yeah, this is just a good book for so many different empathy, ability to have different conversations maybe within this. If you are looking for a history book or just like a different book on this, that this book is just not doing, what you wanted from a book like this. We have not vetted any of these. We have not read any of these, but we did want to give you like our short list for books that we thought we were going to pair with this before we realized this book was so important that we just wanted to give it the space and time that it needed. So there are some history books. One State, The Only Democratic Future for Palestine, Israel by Gada Karmi was one. 2, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State by Jeff Halper. 3, Decolonizing Palestine, The Land, the People, the Bible by Mitri Raheb. 4, The Shortest History of Israel and Palestine by Michael Scott Berman. And so those were some history books that we had looked at. And then in terms of voices of Palestine, we had Palestinian Walks, Forays into a Vanishing Landscape by Raja Shahada. This is covering a period of basically someone in Palestine going on walks between like 1976 to 2006, when there's a lot of settlement movement happening, and a literal changing landscape. And then Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire. This is an edited volume of Palestinian voices. So in case, you know, this is a review that's like, oh yeah, this is probably a good book, but it also like doesn't do what I wanted, which was like more history. Maybe some of those, again, we do not endorse any of them as good or bad. They were the books available in the library at the time that we almost read. And that were also short, I think, was one thing. Other thing we would do. There's probably far more comprehensive, like thick books out there if you're looking for a lot of history. But that was how we made that list. And we offer those to you. And we will, of course, down below in the comments, take your recommendations if you have read a book that you think is another really important read, either specifically about Israel Palestine, or just like, again, this kind of like empathy viewpoint, like all the times we'll take them. As we all know, I read too much nonfiction, even though I haven't done a solo video about that in a while. I'm still reading them. And I think I actually talked about one in our last reading roundtable because it was on theme. In terms of what else we have going on for August, we do have a themed reading roundtable coming up. This one is to fulfill another one of our buddy reading challenges. And because we were like, okay, we're going to be doing this one in August, technically July is when we read it. It's fine, guys. We really wanted to be able to focus on this pick. Let me put it that way. So the reading roundtable theme is a book that reminds you of your childhood. And we are allowing both ourselves and our participants to interpret that in however it means, whether it means going back to a nostalgic book that reminds you of a point in your childhood, or if you want to read like a new book that you're like, oh, this really reminds me of my childhood in some other way. It's open. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't think either of us have picked our book yet. So we literally don't know what's going to happen. So, as we usually don't. So we will see you for that in a couple of weeks. And other than that, all I can say is keep reading these books that help us to better understand each other so that we can build a better world. And we will see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.